or type your questions. So thanks again for your time. Yes, very important topic. I want to make sure we go over some of the questions that I find many of you ask me when I'm out there in the field. PPE is a fun topic. I find it fun because you go out there and you talk to the workers and you do a class. A lot of my clients do an annual reminder where several of the PPE items are brought to the table and explained. What is interesting, though, I find that this regulation, California Code of Regulations, the Section 3380 that relates to personal protective equipment, is one of those rare regulations that requires two certificates to be kept. So these are records that all of you on this call need to have. If one of those is the assessment, the certification of hazard assessment. So, in order for you to actually provide PPE for your employees, you must have done an assessment and write it down when you did it and what portion of your um, uh, facility, department, field operation that assessment belongs to. So we'll talk about how that differs from a brick and mortar manufacturing field construction because it does change. A lot of the activities that you will do sometimes are not static. They're not the same all the time. And this hazard assessment needs to be performed as often as needed. So that's one of the certificates. So I sent to many of my clients, I sent a note today saying, hey, don't miss today's webinar because we're going to be talking about those two certificates that you need to have. And this regulation talks about a certificate for hazard assessment. And the second one is a certificate that you actually trained your employees. But the training is a required point by point training. And I created a grid, a nice document that you can use. And we'll talk about very practical solutions to this PPE issue that many times we have a big question mark above our heads. So we become creative. This is one of those California OSHA performance-based regulations, which means they allow us, they give us the reg, they say this is what we need from you, but then they give us the freedom to see how we want to comply. So it's important to come up with good ideas that will take us to compliance. My information is on the screen for those of you that are new to these webinars. We love doing this first Friday of the month webinar. We also love bringing these classes to your locations. Talk to us if you need classes in Spanish or English, 10-hour or 30-hour classes as well, bilingual, both industries. Uh, so we talked about some of the news. I always give you updates on what's going on. All I can tell you is that I sent a newsletter. Many of you have my newsletter, and because I had questions regarding the first aid kits, when you go to the Kalosha main page, you won't see some of the newest and latest. So I highly advise that you go to the standards board and the hearings, and when they're open, when anything is open for comments from the public. So this last January 15th, we had a regulation that is being changed that has to do with first aid kits. If you did not receive my newsletter, I summarized the contents in there because now you have to go and look into the updated ANSI standard first aid kits. So if your first aid kits are outdated, dirty, and a lot of the contents are expired, I do advise you to look at my newsletter and see what you're missing. All right, what are the learning objectives of today? Number one, there are some responsibilities regarding personal protective equipment. So I want to make sure that we talk about your obligations and how are we expected to make decisions regarding personal protective equipment. And it truly has to do with hazard exposure. Okay. So it's not so much what's available, but what's the exposure? What are you exposing them to? Number two is conducting and documenting a compliant workplace PPE hazard assessment. Most of you have missed this step. Um, I worked with a client a few years back and they were doing tree work and OSHA showed up at one of their sites. And one of the things that they asked was this document, the actual certification of PPE hazard assessment. And they had it. They had it. So I'll show you what is the document that they showed and how this document changed every time they showed up to a different job site. And last but not least, selecting PPE that aligns with the hazard assessment and the regulatory intent, which is, protecting workers from hazards, no, without looking first into elimination of the hazards, of course. And that's why we will briefly visit the hierarchy of controls as well. Let's see what everybody's saying here since I see a lot of people chatting. Yes, so just reminding you guys, everybody's saying hello, and then many of you are making sure that you know how to ask questions. And as always, we provide you with a copy of the slideshow. So the general industry regulations, Article 10, is divided as follows, or those are the sections as appear on your screen. Personal safety devices and safeguards. So Article 10 is what encloses everything about PPE. And so you have 380 person protective devices, and you will find the actual umbrella requirements there. Appendix A is non-mandatory, but we will dissect it today because Appendix A is kind of like your go-to guide on how to comply with PPE selection. Then each of these head protection, eye and face protection, body protection, hand protection, foot protection, jewelry, sanitation, safety belts, life rings, protection from electric shock are found under the Article 10. Nevertheless, for you to find head and eye protection, body protection, you would have a different section. And I just wanted to show how Article 10 is divided and how it adds some things that are not related to PPE, but are important, such as what? 3,400 medical services in first aid at the very end, right? Which doesn't relate to PPE, but it does talk about how to get medical services to any employee, no matter where they are at. So this is Article 10. So you will find that you have from 3380 all the way to 3385 about PPE, and then here and there about things such as safety belts, lifelines, separate, but all contained within Article 10. It is important for you to read 3380, and the reason why I would like for you guys to look at 3380 is because, give me a second here. When you click on 3380, and you should be able to see that now, it goes into personal protective equipment shall be approved for its intended use, provided in section 3206 for this of this orders, which basically says that they have to comply with ANSI and ASTM guidelines, right? So ANSI, it's a nonprofit body of many different stakeholders, right? And what they do is they kind of set up the field for what needs to be the rules for personal protective equipment, right? The rules for personal protective equipment so that manufacturers know what we consumers are looking for when we need a specific type of PPE. And then it goes into it shall be marked. The manufacturer is in charge of marking it, and you will find things such as your eye protection with those markings. And on the leg of this particular model, I have the ANSI Z87, which tells me this is a impact rated type of safety glasses. C says that we have to instruct the employee according to manufacturer's instructions, but then the training really does go into more depth about that. And then D, section D says, or letter D says the employer shall ensure that no matter who provides that PPE, that it is in good condition, clean, safe, sanitary, etc. And then E, it says that it has to fit the worker, right? And here is a very important part of the regulation because I find, and this is very common, when I do PPE sessions, sometimes employees will come up to me and say, well, you know what? A lot of the PPE that we're given, we don't use it because it's not comfortable. It's very cheap. And especially with things that go on their face, such as masks and safety glasses, many times they fog and they can't see. So they see it as cumbersome and they don't wear it. And so supervisors many times give me the look when I say, find a different model, find something that fits, find something that they like wearing. And the reason is because the regulation requires it. It says that the PPE needs to be reasonably comfortable and shall not unduly encumber the employee's movements necessary to perform their work. So if this is fogging up and I can't see, this is going to be cumbersome. I'm not going to wear it. And now you are in violation of Title 8, 3380, subsection E, right? And you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want, this is why we have these webinars to help you out and see where we're missing the mark. And this is a big one because sometimes we make a decision as to the PPE we're going to provide, and then employees are not wearing it and we don't ask why. So there has to be more follow-up. Many times it's because the same group of people, not it does one size doesn't fit all, and so we have to provide different options for them. Okay, very cool. So now letter F is where we find that requirement for the hazard assessment and equipment selection. So we have to make sure that we look into the workplace in order for us to start selecting the PPE. And then after we assess the workplace, so this letter F says assess it, then select it, then communicate your decision about PPE to your affected employees, and then make sure that it fits appropriately. So that's kind of like the order, right? And I love to see that many of you are okay, okay, that kind of makes sense. You're making notes. That's perfect. All right. So back to my presentation there. It is important for us to kind of go over the specific requirements, right? Approved PPE. So that's why it says approved for its intended use under 3206, which talks about what are the actual um, uh, standards, ANSI standards, ASTM, that are adopted because we have to have somebody who sets the bar, right, as to what this pieces of personal protective equipment should be complying with. So OSHA, California OSHA, when you see a box that says OSHA approved or Cal OSHA approved, that is false advertisement. Articles of personal protective equipment are not OSHA approved. They might be ANSI compliant or ASTM compliant or UL compliant, right? Because they have been tested by the accredited laboratory or the standard, and they have been manufactured according to it. So the proper selection and fit is also what Cal OSHA is requiring. And I wanted to highlight exactly what I read from the regulation, which says that PPE has to be comfortable and not unduly encumber the employee's movements necessary to perform work. Very, very important note there. So we need to go into that certification of hazard assessment. It is important for us to know that even if employees show up with personal protective equipment, or if we allow employees to bring their own PPE, that we, the employer, the organization, is ultimately responsible for ensuring that it is clean, sanitary, and that is not being worn beyond their expiration um, life, or that workers know the limitations, etc. So ultimately, the employer is in charge of ensuring that PPE is used as it is intended, right? It doesn't matter if you are relying on them buying it and you reimburse them, or if you just hire them and tell them that they have to bring their own PPE. You are responsible for everything within what we're discussing today. We have to make sure that the PPE is maintained safe and in sanitary condition. That's why there's audits, random audits on PPE that our employees are wearing or taking to the job sites is super important. Walkthroughs are some of the best things to do, or your lifesavers for sure. Okay, so let's dive into our hazard assessment, because in order to select PPE, we must assess the workplace. That's super important. All right. We got to look at all the existing hazards. So as you walk through the departments, if you have a manufacturing plant, or as you walk through the activities, if you have field sites, you have to be able to continue to take a look at what are the hazards that your workers are facing, right? And it's good to have a list of those hazards, just kind of like going into those categories and circling them as you visit or walk through to see how you want to analyze them and then select the PPE. So you got to match those hazards. But before you get into selecting the PPE, once you're walking through, you got to make sure that you go back to your desk and look into how are we controlling those hazards. That's what's key. Anytime I do a 10-hour class or a 30-hour class, I always talk to all of you about having this new um, safety mind, right? So this is the new you. I always say this is the new you. You always look at every single hazard at the job sites under the lens of the hierarchy of controls. You want to always, first and foremost, eliminate hazards, because if there's a machine that is causing debris that is making people slip, okay, how can we eliminate this? don't just start giving them a boot that is anti-slip, right? Because you're starting backwards. How can you eliminate the hazard? Maybe you didn't know, but at the moment they installed this machine, they missed the guard that went around it and captured a lot of that debris. And so elimination of that debris should be your first thought. And that should be the new you, right? So that hazard assessment helps you to go back, sit down, and look into that hierarchy of controls. We're going to get into that. So the famous Appendix A, right? So it's not mandatory, and you saw it under Article A, right immediately after Section 3380. And although it's non-mandatory, it's most helpful for all of us on the call because it helps us and guides us on how to comply, right? So it gives us best practices, it gives us a framework for hazard assessment. So I like to treat it as a step-by-step method to justify your PPE selection and decision. So mind you, these webinars, every month when we visit a topic, we want you to walk out of these sessions with something practical. And I like to see that the Appendix A is truly a step-by-step method. All right, let me see. Do I have any questions here? Um, Okay. While non-mandatory, following this appendix does show reasonable diligence during inspections, right? So it's the standard or the regulation giving you ideas on how to comply. Okay, so let's go to the pyramid of controls, the hierarchy of controls, right? It was devised by NIOSH, the National Institute for Safety and Health, because they're the ones doing a lot of the research and you know they're kind of like the big brother of OSHA, where they do all of this. They're providing all of the information for OSHA to pass standards. Okay, PPE devices alone are not to be relied on to provide protection against hazards. We have to be using these PPE devices after we've looked into what else is there for the elimination of hazards, such as what? Guards, engineering controls, sound manufacturing practices, right? So when we say sound manufacturing practices, now we're talking about the way people do the job. How are they doing the task? Step-by-step tasks. And that's an administrative control. Okay, so let's look into that hierarchy of controls because we know that when we use it, the last line of defense is PPE. Is not the first. It's because it's not as effective because it depends on human beings to wear it correctly and to remember to wear it. So we have to document what controls exist and are available to us and are feasible for us to implement even before PPE is selected. And here in this picture, I have just an example of those soundproofing curtains or panels that can be installed whenever you have we all have limited space to do the work we do, and many times it's very noisy. So looking into how can we, instead of just handing out earplugs and earmuffs, we have to talk to workers about that is not the first thing we did. We have looked into how can we eliminate the noise. And of course, we looked into the design of the machinery that is producing the noise. We looked into, do we really need this process to be in this portion of the facility where workers are walking by or nearby? So can we isolate this noisy process, right? So we are starting to think and brainstorm as to how many things can we do to completely and fully eliminate the hazards. That should be number one. And then number two, the actual engineering controls, which in this case, those sound barriers become your go-to engineering control after looking into the design of the machine. So maybe sometimes we have outdated pieces of equipment and we need to look into budget to upgrade them so that we can eliminate these hazards. So that's a perfect example. Here is the famous hierarchy of control by NIOSH. So it always starts as the elimination being the most effective way of controlling a hazard. So before we provide PPE to the workers, we look into these things. And that picture of the soundproofing of an area in a manufacturer place becomes really a wonderful way to give life to what we're discussing today, right? So elimination is number one. Number two is substitution. Can we substitute this with something less noisy, or can we replace this hazard? Or if we're talking about chemicals, a chemical that is very corrosive, can we substitute it with something less corrosive? And sometimes the answer is yes. We just haven't looked into it, right? After we look into elimination and substitution, then we look into engineering controls as the next layer of protection. Is there anything within the design of the area where the exposure is occurring that we can modify? During COVID-19, we saw the widespread of plexiglass as a way of engineering the hazard, meaning trying to put a barrier between the people and their interactions, so you wouldn't have that aerosolized amount of viruses in the air where it would land in the respiratory tract of the person who took care of clients, visitors, etc. We also saw a widespread use of filters that brought higher protection and would trap more particles, right? So high efficiency filters. That's all an engineering. Those are all examples of engineering controls that we must look into before we start selecting our personal protective equipment. The next layer of protection is administrative controls, and this changed the way people work. So anything that has to do with a step, a change in the actual sequence, a change in how people work, such as rotating people. I am making sure that they take breaks that are not the by law type of break every 2 hours, but maybe every 30 minutes or every 45 minutes. So anything that relates to changing the way people work to diminish the risk of being exposed to this hazard is considered administrative control and is still more effective than PPE. Last but not least, after we've looked into all of those and we've come up with ideas on how to remove the hazard, all the way to how can we change the way people work, we look into, okay, let's now protect the worker with personal protective equipment. And so now, after we've eliminated the hazard by isolating the noisy machine, and then we have a soundproofing curtain, now we get into, does the hazard still exist and how much of it, right? What's the actual exposure now that we've looked into elimination, substitution, engineering controls, and rotation of people, etc. And when I say rotation of people, that also helps in the case of noise, because remember, it's a dose, right? With no noise, we measure a dose. It's like with medication. You get as much noise as you get, you at the end of the day, you've received a dose of noise. And so if we can reduce the dose, so by reducing the amount of time that they're exposed to more than 85 decibels of noise, which is the action level, then you would be in better shape. You would say, okay, so now for those that are still exposed to, and remember the PEL, permissible exposure limit for noise, is 90 decibels. For those that are still exposed to a PEL of 90 decibels in an 8-hour time-weighted average, now we're going to implement, although we already did all of this, we're going to implement the use of hearing protectors. And then you get into earplugs and earmuffs. And we did have a full 1 hour webinar. So look into the history of our YouTube channel. You will find a lot more in regards of noise and hearing conservation programs. But that's the way you would go into it, because specifically for noise, you have to look into the actual type of foam, the density of the foam, which is called a noise rating, right? And then taking into account the fact that not everybody's ear canal is the same. There's a method on how to put it on. And so there's also a recommended formula on how to calculate true protection when you're wearing earplugs. And if the need for earmuffs still exists, how to calculate how much reduction by putting now a second layer of protection. So that's how you would select it. If the earplug would, with the formula, taking in account the actual human factor, how they wear it, etc., and if there's a possibility of leakage of noise, then you take into account that, and then you make a decision as to whether or not earplugs is more than enough. You don't need earmuffs. But if there's still that need because now the worker moves to a noisier area or is exposed to different areas throughout their day, then you make a decision as to whether or not the earmuffs are needed. All right. So once you've looked into the hierarchy, and I gave an example with noise, but every single hazard that the workers are exposed to, you would walk yourself down the hierarchy of controls in the same way. All right. Questions, anybody? All right. So considered some guidelines assessing foot, head, eye, and face and hand hazard situations to match the protective devices to the particular hazards. But when we assess, we really should have during our walkthrough a list of those categories of hazards that we're looking for, right? And who should be doing this assessment? Well, it should be your safety officer, your safety director, somebody who it says who has common sense, but common sense is like a superpower. Not nobody really knows what that means. So we don't rely on common sense. We rely on experience, right? So it should be somebody who's experienced in safety, who has the expertise to look into these hazards and then do the appropriate selection. Mind you, a lot of the times I may not be as experienced with fall protection, let's say harnesses, and you will need the input of that person in charge of the fall protection program because they will tell you, well, we tried these harnesses before and workers found it a little bit more cumbersome because you have to adjust the leg straps all the time versus with these ones, that have the buckle, or they will tell you what the workers prefer depending on what you're doing. So take a look at getting input from those people in the departments where they know historically what has been worn, and that'll help you. It'll give you great input. So here are the steps, right? Conduct a walkthrough survey, consider the sources of the hazards in question, organize the data, analyze the data, and make your PPE selection. So these are simple steps, and you're gonna get a copy of this slideshow, and you will have your guide, just a nice practical guide. I'm big on surveys or walkthroughs because that's how you will find and you will look and observe for hazard categories. And these hazard categories have to do with impact, anything that could fall on the worker, anything that would roll on the worker, and tools, the use of tools. What is the worker being exposed to that is an impact type of hazard? Or penetration, when I go out there for construction job sites, they're full of debris, and we know that there's nails on the floor that we can't see because there's too much stuff. So the type of boot that they use is important. Of course, when you look into your hierarchy of controls, as the workers go out there to do their job, one of the things that they do is clear the debris before they start staging, for example, so that there's less risk of them stepping on a nail, right? But the right kind of boot is, part of the PPE that you are dictating for that type of job. Rolling over, such as material or stock that you have as part of the job, the product that you produce, etc. You look at it. Is there a situation where things can fall on people's feet? How about before I go into chemical? How about the use of equipment and machinery, such as pallet jacks and forklifts? All of those machinery equipment that could represent the issue of a person having their feet injured. That's something that you got to note down. Chemical issues, you write down what types of chemicals they use. You want to do this per department, or and always make sure you prioritize, right? Because sometimes you do have within your own establishment, you do have areas of work where the use of chemicals is more prominent, and you have to look into what types of chemicals, because then you have your janitors, they will have use of chemicals as well, but the actual types of chemicals may not be as hazardous as the ones that your other department is using to mix, molding mix for whatever they're producing and putting into specific ovens or etc. So chemical is another thing that you're looking into. Heat. We are entering spring. We will have some heat waves, right? So we look at what types of jobs expose the workers to heat, because things such as even what type of boot they're wearing matters. Many of those workers with steel toe will feel the heat even hotter, right? So it'll be even hotter for them because steel toe boots are conductive of heat. Harmful dust. So now you have your welders, you have the people that are cutting and soldering, you have the people that are also working next to other trades. In the construction industry, we have a lot of exposure to silica dust just because they're working around masons, for example. and light or optical radiation in the medical fields, in laboratories, and you have to take a look at what is exactly that they are being exposed to, the type of lasers, so that you can select the appropriate type of eye protection. Okay, once you've looked into the actual basic hazard categories, you are going to come up with some of the solutions, right? The controls, because remember, now you have to look into your hierarchy of controls to reduce uh, per the pyramid that we showed. Here's just a picture where workers need to get to the top of the tank. The tank, because of the constraints of the place where this tank is installed, doesn't have enough space for us to actually install a good anchor point on one of the beams. Plus, it would need to be certified by a structural engineer that it actually is capable to withstand 5,000 pounds in case someone fell. So there wasn't any space, but um, there were some installed anchor points that were not certified, right? And the problem is, if you're going to go to the top of the tank, now you are anchoring below your waist level, which you really shouldn't do unless you're talking about construction where you are atop a structure that you're building, right? And those are very rare instances. In this case, the way to do it is to what? Eliminate the hazard. So even before I start thinking, oh, well, it shouldn't be below waist level, I should put it up here. Let's look at this beam, call an engineer, structural engineer to take a look at this and see if he could certify it or she could certify it. Before we even talk about that, you step back and how can we eliminate this whole thing, right? And so you start to, okay, why do we need our employees to get up there? Oh, well, they need to clean the tank. Okay, is this the only way we have to do this cleaning or maintenance activity? Um, well, I guess we could do it differently. And how would it be done differently? Well, maybe by creating a platform, or maybe by doing a cleaning in place type of system where the tank is cleaned by a pump that is brought to the location, and it pumps the chemicals into the tank, and now you don't have to get up on top. So you start eliminating the hazard before you start installing an anchor point to put people in harnesses and fall protection or fall arrest systems. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's just an example. The next one, this is from the OSHA videos, how when you have to work at heights, before you look into the hierarchy of controls and how can you eliminate the hazard, if you just tell workers to do the job, they will be very creative as to how to get the job done, right? Versus having training and education and analyzing it and making sure that we have the right tools for the job. So this is all about analyzing through your survey, basic hazard categories, and then walking down the hierarchy of controls, right? So when you are out there in the field, look at the sources, right? So where are the sources of motion? So if you have machinery or activity that poses that issue where workers are unjamming machinery, or there's movement from equipment, forklifts, and collision could occur. All of those things, you got to write it down. So look for sources of motion. Look for sources of high temperatures. What's producing heat here? Look for sources of chemical exposure. Look for sources of that harmful dust. So now you have the categories. Now you look at what's producing it in order for you to actually start engineering out and eliminating these hazards. What's the source of live radiation? What's the source of these falling objects, right? Sources for sharp objects. And the reason why we want to analyze the sources of any of these types of hazards is because, let's just think about it. For falling objects, if you have workers at a lower level and workers on an upper level working on scaffolding with tools and equipment, how can you eliminate the issue of falling objects? So we can put a tow board, which is engineering it out. You're doing something, you're changing the environment to prevent the hazard, right? But again, can we bring the work to a lower level? It just, when you look at the source of that hazard, it allows you to pose the question as to how can you engineer it, substitute it, or implement a new administrative control in order to diminish the risk and then look into personal protective equipment. Once you've looked at this data, once you've looked at the sources of where the hazard is at, what's producing it, and you look into engineering it out, and you look at controlling these hazards, then you can go ahead and organize your data. And you can use different forms. So the objective is to prepare this analysis, right? So let's look at a couple of PPE hazard assessment certifications. So let me see. I think I have one here for you. And this is the one we've been using for my clients. And I will send it for you for your use. Okay, now I'm not finding it. But I will make sure I get you a copy of this particular PPE. I found it. Let's take a look at the document. Is everybody looking at my Word document? No? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So look at this. You get the worksite name, who's assessing the workplace, who's doing the survey, the address. If this is a field site, this is important, right? If this is not a field site, then it's headquarters. You could just put headquarters or just your physical address. But when this is a field job site, this is very important because let's say you're a tree worker and you're a lead person and you're in charge of doing the PPE hazard assessment for your workers. Well, you start the work with, assessing the hazards. And once you do that, for example, it will dictate what type of hard hats your workers will wear. Why? Because maybe you have a full workforce of 10 people, but one of those guys is certified to do work closer to those trees or areas where there is live lines, right? So if that's the case, the type of hard hat would be different, right? Couldn't be vented and it has to be non-conductive, right? So it would be a type 1 or 2, right? And then we'll talk about it a little bit. I have a couple of those hard hats here in my box of PPE. But then it would also have to be non-conductive, non-vented. And so by you getting there and assessing the work site, you would determine what type of PPE. It could be a job task that is reviewed, or it could be a whole department. So you make your notes here. And you divide this document. It's a 2-page document that I'll send you, but you can modify it for your use. Eyes and face. I like this one because it just basically talks to you about, is there a hazard present? Yes or no? Can the hazard be eliminated without the use of PPE? And it makes you think about it. Okay, hold on a second. Before I even think about PPE, can I eliminate this issue? Yes or no? No, because we have to actually go up there to trim that palm tree. Comments and notes. Anything that you did for the elimination of the hazard would be noted there. And then what are the exposures? So now you're saying, well, there's for the ice and phase, there's fly and fragments, there could be airborne dust and particulates if you're talking about tree work, right? Other it already said flying fragments or debris, airborne dust or particles, other the use of power tools, for example. What is this selected PPE? So now that you know that, you would do safety glasses. And when we say safety glasses, that would mean ANSI rated safety glasses. So the safety glasses cannot be bought at your dollar store. It cannot be just eye protection. It has to have the ANSI C87 marking on the leg. Sometimes it's on the over here, right? But it has to be on the lens. Goggles, okay, that would be for chemical splash or liquids. So if the task does not involve the use of chemicals where you are concerned with splashes, then you wouldn't select goggles or face shields, right? Filtered lenses, when there's intense light or radiation, then you would know what shade. A welding hood, other. And you make your notes there because for welders, there's also that specific shade depending on what type of welding they're doing. So now that you see how you went into, this is the job site that I am doing my survey. So I love this form because it was created specifically to do what we are guided to do in Appendix A of the regulation, which is the survey, the analysis of the hazards. Then it poses, it's not very good at helping you with the hierarchy of controls because this is something you should do before you even look into PPE, right? But it does prompt you to ask the question, can the hazard be eliminated without PPE? So that you go back into what else have we done to get rid of this hazard? Have we tried to eliminate it first? Most of the time, whenever workers are doing jobs, this portion of looking into the hierarchy of controls has already been looked at. Nevertheless, the question prompts you to go back and say, hey, why can't we do this instead, right? Okay, so eyes and face and head. Hazard present, yes or no? Can hazard be eliminated without the use of PPE? Then your comments. What is the potential exposure? If it's falling objects, overhead obstructions, exposed electrical components, moving equipment, other. So I have here, okay, let me ask a question and see how many of you know. What's the life of a hard hat? Once you put it out in service, how long should you have a hard hat out to be worn by your employees? Let's see how many know the answer. Okay, several of you are answering. I love it. 3 years, 5 years, 2 to 3, 5. You can see it depends on the type of hat. 5 years per the manufacturer's useful life. Oh, I love all of these comments. I love you guys chatting about it. The manufacturer defines it. Okay. So this is my trusty hard hat, and I have a couple of examples here for you guys to see. There's this one with the full brim and the suspension. And then we have this one where you can see obvious wear and tear. This one, the suspension came off, but it's also very dull in the sense that it has been exposed to the sun and is no longer a good suspension. So for those of you that said 5, yes, that is the general rule of or what manufacturers like to say 5 years from the time you put it out in service, but also you wouldn't want to be wearing a hard hat that has been in a warehouse for 15 years, exposed to all of the changes if the warehouse is not temperature controlled, that kind of thing. But yes, it's 5 years from the time that you put it out in service. But this thing, the inside, the actual suspension needs to be replaced every 12 months. So raise your hand if you did not know that. So then we have the different types of hard hat, right? And this is where it is important that as you're doing or using this form that you have in your screen, you're asking the right questions. If you are concerned with falling objects, are we only concerned about falling objects from the top? If the answer is yes, then you just need a type 1 type of hard hat. So hard hats are divided into 2 types, and this is how they handle impact. So if it's from the top or it's from the sides. So you would be like, sides? Why the sides? Well, I do have a client where they have a wet location, meaning they do manufacture a product that requires that a specific area of the manufacturing plant is always wet. It's always wet. And when they clean it and squeegee it out, they do have all the drainage per the requirements in the food industry. But it becomes an interesting hazard because it's always slippery, right? It's always slippery. So the hard hat I recommended for the workers that do the cleaning and all the squeegeeing in that area is a hard hat that is a type 2 so they can withstand impact from the top and from the sides. I also recommended that the hard hat have what? An actual strap. And the reason is because with the strap, if they slip and fall, the hard hat is not going to be flying out, right? Which happens with these types of hard hats. So I asked them that they would wear a hard hat with a strap. So in case they fall because it's a wet location, the hard hat is not going to go flying out and it could withstand impact from the sides or from the back. So that would be a type 2. Lots to know about hard hats. They do have a little tiny circle in the inside, so I invite you to take a look at your hard hat. And the circle points with an arrow at the month and the year. So that's how you would know the actual date of manufacturing of your hard hat. What else? Oh yeah, if it's vented like this one, it is not. Oh, so we have the hard hats, type 1 or type 2, but you also have classes, class G, E, or C. And C, conductive. You wouldn't wear it next to electricity. G is more of a general nature for all kinds of workers like painters, regular construction workers who are not assigned to do electrical work. They do still withstand up to 2,200 volts, I believe. But then you have your class E, which is for those that are working with electricity because the resistance is up to 20,000 volts. And so that's class E. All right. So as you can see, lots to know just in regards to hard hats. And that's how you would make your selection, right? What's the hazard present? Are we talking about exposed electrical components? So you would get your class 1 or 2, depending on the work being done, depending where the impact is coming from. And then you would say G, E, or C. Very nice. Hands on arms, same deal. You get into what are the potential exposures, cuts, abrasions, punctures, chemical exposures, thermal exposures, tool, and you can add whatever else you have here that it is in your list of hazard categories, right? And then selected PPE, protective glove, what type? Is it cut resistant? Is it chemical resistant? Are the sleeves or arm protection needed? For example, for the people that some of my clients grinding, right? There's a lot of that spark coming onto the sleeve. And when we did a walkthrough, I realized that the worker was wearing an apron, but he wasn't wearing anything on his arms to protect him. And so that's something that with your walkthroughs, you're able to observe and you're able to look into the appropriate PPE for that particular job. Same deal with the feet and legs. Uh, in regards to boots, boots are also, a whole world in and of themselves. Why? Because we have steel toe versus composite toe versus some of those alloys that are out there. And the way you start selecting the appropriate type of PPE, and mind you, with boots or work boots, that's one of the items that you're not required to pay for it. But I really do hope that you would have some sort of allowance because it's just whenever you're requiring a certain type of boot because of a specific type of task, then you have to pay for it. But if it's just a regular work boot that you're asking for, you're not required to pay for it. But it's always a good practice, best practice to have an allowance, right? A yearly allowance. Very cool. So when would you select a steel toe versus a composite toe boot? It really depends, right? Let's say that your workers have to be walking long distances. Well, a steel toe boot would be more cumbersome to wear because it's heavier. Also, if it's hot, if they're walking long distances and the environment is hot, the steel toe boot may not be the right choice. It would have to be a composite, right? Because it's either fiberglass or some sort of plastic that the actual that keeps the toes or the boot itself a little bit cooler. Also, the toe box is slightly bigger for some reason, bigger than the steel toe, and it would provide a little bit more room. It's looks a little bit bigger, but it's less heavy and it's not going to be heat conductive or cold conductive, right? So not really a good choice if it's the worker is exposed to cold, extreme heat, right? Or walking long distances. So you look at what are the hazards, then you select your PPE accordingly. Then for the body, chemical splashes, abrasions, extreme heat or cold, other, and then what are you selecting? Is it a lab coat, coveralls or suits, aprons? And this is how you actually do your selection. I remember talking to some of my crew members who were doing a lot of power washing and how they were just wearing their regular uniforms and their top long rubber boots and of course the mask and the face shield. But, my concern was with the uniforms because it really depends on what they were power washing that you get a big question mark on what you're bringing home on those uniforms. So a decision was made as to bring coveralls to that particular task for those that were involved in power washing whenever you had issues such as, for example, stains right outside of bars, etc., what it would be common to have stains from bodily fluids, right? And you wouldn't want hepatitis A, C, B to be part of some of those things that you're creating aerosols and getting it on your clothes. So coveralls versus just a apron or just the regular uniform. So that's how you walk down your selection is what is the hazard, right? What is it that they're being exposed to? Power washing, if it's just water and the stains are oil, etc., it's not the same as if the stains that you're power washing have to do with bodily fluids. All right. And then also how you would dispose of those, the PPE would be different. One is very different for regular oil, chemicals, dust versus hazardous bodily fluids or that are considered hazardous waste. Okay, respiratory and hearing, you have, is there a hazard present? What is the hazard? Is it dust? Is it particulates? Is it vapors or gases? Other things, you could separate it. If you want the hearing stuff separated, that's fine. But high noise levels, I just put it here because you don't want the form to be too long. And then at the end, this statement is required. Certification statement. I certify that a workplace hazard assessment has been conducted and that appropriate personal protective equipment has been selected based on the identified hazards. The affected employees will be trained on the proper use, the limitations, the care, the maintenance, etc. That statement is mandated. It's a certificate that needs to be present depending on the task being done. If it's a brick and mortar and manufacturing, that doesn't change. One assessment until your operations change. So it doesn't have an expiration date. It's more so as to, are you changing anything in the environment? Do we need to reassess the PPE being worn here? But with field operations, I would have one per job site, right? And if anything changes, you need to reassess. And that's what Cal OSHA requested my client to have, one per each of the job sites that they were working at. All right. Now, let's move on to the last bit of information for those of you that stayed until the end, and that is the, um, wait a minute. That is my grid. The grid is super important because here we go. The grid that I'm going to give, and I love that little picture. Isn't that cute with all his PPE? Okay, so when is the PPE necessary? What PPE is necessary? How to put it on, take it off, the limitations and the proper care. So just create a grid for you to get the job done. This is the requirement per California Title 8 CCR 3380 in regards of training. Once you decide and select the PPE, you got to tell workers why do they use it? When do they use it? How do they put it on? How do they take it off? What are the limitations? And how do they clean it or discard of it? Okay, so there's some typos on my grid. I did change it. And I actually changed it and I put pictures of the PPE per the department or the crew that I am training. So the boot that they're wearing, whatever they need, you put it on, the picture is there, and then you go over and you have them make notes. You have it up on a screen or you have all of these answered already, each of those, why do they use it? You answer it and have a grid that you can distribute, discuss, and you're done. So this is the second document that is required per California OSHA that you have a certification of, which is the actual certificate that you told workers why do they use it, when, how, the limitations, and how to discard of them. All right. I hope I made it really practical. I gave you two documents that you can use and get your PPE compliance up to date. Did we fulfill our objectives, ladies and gentlemen? I believe we did. Number one, we talked about the why do we need to do PPE selection per hazard exposure, not just preference of whatever is available. The second thing we did is we talked about that PPE hazard assessment, and we talked about Appendix A of the regulation, which gives you a great step-by-step guide on how to do this hazard assessment. And last but not least, we talked about once you find the hazards and you've already controlled the hazards per the hierarchy of controls, you're looking to selecting the appropriate PPE per the type of hazard the worker is exposed to. You look at what it's offered out there. We talk in this case, I focused on hard hats, for example, and we talked about why would you pick one with a strap versus one without it. It's super important. All right, thank you, you guys. I think we are at 2 minutes before 12. Do we have any questions?
We do. We have a question in the Q&A feature. It says,
Okay.
PPE selection may fall under facility department. Is there a formal way to suggest your ideas on PPE selection, especially with maternity and females?
Okay. Let me see the question again. I want to see.
It's in the Q&A
I
feature,
see.
not in the
Ah,
chat.
folder. So are we talking about PPE for people that are pregnant, right? So is there I just the question is a little bit too general. I wish we could have a little bit more of a because the answer to our PPE selection is precisely what we talked today, right? Number one, the survey. And then using the form to actually find the hazards, listing the hazards, and then getting into did we already look into eliminating those hazards? Okay, there's still risk. Okay, we now select PPE accordingly, depending on what hazard is still left that my employee is going to be exposed to. And with PPE selection, if you have women that are pregnant, you have additional things to look into. And this is a very good comment. It's a very good question because sometimes what affects some employees will affect pregnant women in pregnancy differently, and you would want to look into what is best for them at that time. So PPE selection does apply to that. You would want to look first, of course, into eliminating any exposure, especially if the person is pregnant and has a sensitivity to chemicals, a sensitivity to smells, a sensitivity to whatever it is. You'll want to take a look at the hierarchy of controls first. But that same process that I discussed today would apply the same way. So if we talk about what ideas, look, survey your area. Take a look at how many people in that department are allowed to be, for example, having maternity or breastfeeding periods of time where they are still required to wear this type of PPE and apply the same process, right? Types of hazards that they are being exposed to. Can we engineer them out, look into hierarchy of controls, and then selecting the appropriate PPE? But a lot of the times, if you could administer it out, meaning why do we have to have uh, uh, this type of work being done by this particular type of workers? Can we change the way the work is done? Can we rotate them? Or can we just during that period of time not have them do this particular job? So it all depends with how that conversation goes with your supervisors and what can be done at that time. Anything else?
I think just a follow-up, Mary did put in the chat, getting special permission to order outside of the stock is more specific.
Oh, that's my challenge.
Mhm.
That's everybody's challenge. We get so gung-ho about, nope, this is what we have. Sorry. So it really does take training and education. So I wish everybody would look at this webinar. I love that in the very beginning of the webinar is when I tackle the fact that the regulation does require that people wear it and it's not cumbersome to them, that it allows for free movement, that it's actually going to stay there to protect the work, that the worker is encouraged to wear it. It's a whole line there. It's in my slides. If people who do the purchasing would come to these webinars and be, oh my gosh, so that means I need to have 5 different models of PPE, just safety glasses? The answer is yes. Does that mean that I have to have 5 different types of face shields or? Yes, you do. You do because so these things, you take the film out, they get fogged up all the time. They're awful. You get this something like this. It's not very expensive. Now it's not, these are anti-fog safety face shields. They're not impact rated, but they're not going to get all foggy on you. And so it does require that you do more look into different models and provide. Don't just get stuck with that's what we have in stock. Have them watch that movie. What's the movie with Captain America, Chris Evans. He made a movie in 2011, so it's an old movie, in regards to the Needle Stick Safety Act and how that was the problem. The problem why we had so many people in healthcare being stuck by needles was because hospitals were not looking into buying different kinds of protective devices. And it all had to do with the purchasing and all these contracts and deals that hospitals were getting. And heaven forbid they would get them a engineered sharp because that was too expensive, right? And so it became a law. That's why it became a law, and it became a movie, a good movie to watch for those of you that love safety related movies. Same deal with PPE. If the workers are not wearing it, ask why, and you'll find very valuable information. Sometimes it has to do with, oh, because I asked for a replacement, they don't give it to me. That's crazy. I asked for a replacement, and I think the manager thinks that I'm selling them uh, in the corner, and I am making a profit, and I don't get a replacement. That's also wrong. You have to provide replacement. You have to give them as many as they need so they wear them. So put a basket there with uh, eye protection. Let them grab as many as they need throughout the day. Don't, right? It costs money. I, I don't think they're taking it home, especially if you have cameras. Well, some people may be taking it home, but it's all a culture, right? You're trusting them that they will wear and have whatever they need. So you may also do some disciplinary action where you say, hey, we've noticed that you're taking 5 every day. Okay. It'll be one person, maybe two that do that. But versus I don't wear my safety glasses because I have to bring the old pair for me to get a replacement. Ugh. You see what I mean? Don't make it difficult on them. I'm looking at whether or not we have more. Okay. Thank you so much, you guys. I appreciate your time. And Mary, I hope I had a better response for you. That's the truth. But with PPE, you just got to look at the process just like we described it today and make your decisions walking down that same process. All right? Thank you so much, you guys. Have a fantastic weekend. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you next month, first Friday of the month.
Thank you so much, Elba. We really appreciate you sharing all of your expertise with us and have a good weekend, everybody.
All right, we'll talk soon. You'll get the 2 documents, the grid, my form for the hazard assessment, and the slideshow. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.